bifurcate the list, if they're going to move up the others, or exactly what they're going to do. There are countries now that have been taken off the FATF grey list, Jamaica, that finds itself a year after us in exactly the same boat. So there's a very serious disconnect, and it's going to have to be dealt with. We are going to face exactly the same issue again in another 2 years. This is not a case where you're off and you're off for good. A fifth round will start in 2027. So in 2027, we once more have to subject ourselves to the question, are we meeting all of the requirements? Are we meeting all of the prudential norms that are set for us? Are we compliant? They're going to do a review of all of our systems, a review of all of our regulators. They're going to do everything that they did before to determine if we're compliant. Now, the thing is, we found ourselves subject to the regime because we had reached the threshold. It's called broad money. The amount of money in the Barbadian economy exceeded $5 billion. And that, as long as you exceeded $5 billion, you fell into that review process. Obviously, that was an arbitrary number, and it caused countries like ourselves tremendous hardship. The FATF has changed the criteria. So they've now said that the value of broad money that must be circulating in your economy is now 10 billion US dollars. If I said 5 million, I apologize, I meant 5 billion US. But they've now changed it, they've now raised it to say 5 billion US dollars. If you meet these criteria, including your broad money being to a value of 5 billion US dollars or more, you have to go into the review process. Now, I'm told by the economists that we are not likely to pass that threshold. But there's another problem, because there's an or. Or if you're a highly indebted country. And under the World Bank assessment, Barbados is a highly indebted country. So that we escape through one mechanism, but we are likely to get caught in a second one. So it is quite possible that we may find ourselves up for review, but I can say that this year's estimates makes adequate provision, in my view, for a number of things, a number of projects, including training and so on, some of which we've already started to make sure that we are able to satisfy the assessors in 2027, that Barbados continues to be a jurisdiction that meets all of the requirements, and hopefully we will remain off of the FATF grey list, and by then hopefully we'll be off of the EU blacklist. I know that this may seem a little bit of a challenge, but for members to understand its importance. But let me end by saying this. 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, a Barbadian company bought a company in Poland. Now, that in itself is a remarkable achievement, because for many years we've been saying Barbadian companies have the capacity to become global players. So this Barbadian company, owned by Barbadians, bought a company in Poland. Poland is in the EU. Because Barbados was on the EU blacklist, the EU bank said, we are not doing any business with WINA. We're not doing any business with Barbados. Do not even try to send any money up here. Now, the thing about owning a company is that you gotta be able to pay for it, and then as a shareholder, you have obligations. But the commercial banks determined that they were not going to do any business with this Barbadian entity because we were on the EU blacklist. That Barbadian company had to give up, had to surrender that investment. There were people who were operating in Barbados who were not able to find correspondent banking so as to be able to send money abroad. So all of these are the kinds of things that are impacted by the work that we do. We are the gatekeeper. And even though it's almost counterintuitive that it should be in the Office of the Attorney General, it is there simply because it all has to do with how we deal with money laundering. But I thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, because I believe Barbadians need to understand that every day as a government, we have to fight not only the problems within, but the problems without. And that it costs a great deal of money, it takes a lot of time, and requires a lot of expertise to be able to manage these very complex and complicated requirements and relationships in order to keep the Barbadian economy going. So let me just thank you and your team, as well as the others in other ministries that have worked to try to get us to a place where we can seek to be as compliant as we can be. The good people of St. James South are always paying careful attention to what we do as a government. And there was a question put, I believe it was touched on slightly earlier by the Honourable Member for the City. This question, however, is open to whoever needs to answer. They express a concern about children who've lost parents to violent circumstances where a parent may have been killed, and the trauma that that child experiences. In addition, there's also the trauma for the child whose parent has committed a crime and has gone to prison, and coping with the stigma, coping with the mixed messages that they may be getting in their families presents a genuine problem for them. And the question is, what is it we are doing to be able to support children of persons who have either experienced violence or have been killed, or their parent has committed a crime? And what are some of the things that you think we also need to do as other members of the society to help support the work that you're doing in that area?
I'm going to allow the member for the city, the Minister of State, to respond. But let me just take you back to a few questions ago when we talked about victim support. And I'd like to reiterate the comments that we made in relation to victim support. As I said, this is new ground that we're covering because we've traditionally not looked at victims. As far as we were concerned, as far as the public is concerned, so-and-so stabbed you to get locked up, you got your justice. Had nothing to do with whether that stab was so debilitating that you could never work again, that your children can't eat or get medication or anything of the sort or go to school because you no longer can work. So victim support is a new element that is before us, and we intend to grapple with it in a very serious way, budgetary restraints notwithstanding. But then there are other methodologies, and I invite the Minister of State to discuss those with you.
Thank you very much, AG and Honourable Member, for the question. As the Attorney General spoke before, not only are we doing victimization survey, which looks at general victimization, ongoing right now on the ground by criminologists in the office, Kim Ramsey, you're looking at actually reaching out and making sure that we have the names, the numbers, and contact with all the victims of homicide and serious crimes. We've acknowledged in the office that hurt people, and we need to heal these hurt people. The specific initiatives that will be deployed, as mentioned before, will be through the Ministry of People Empowerment to provide that more tangible support, but under our victims program and under our therapy pillar, we're looking at making sure that we address the spiritual, emotional, and psychological needs of these individuals through counseling and through various types of modern age therapy deployment, like art therapy, music therapy, drama therapy, and so on. It is fortuitous that you asked this because, as the AG mentioned earlier with the draft George Bridge Agreement, I think it's number 5 or 6 that speaks specifically, and I will quote it as we quoted it before: implement targeted programs for children affected by violence, including those of murder victims and incarcerated perpetrators. Almost sounds verbatim to your question. And it is these types of documents that will direct the type of programs that we will deploy. But to speak specifically to your question, under the victim support pillar, which falls under violence reduction, and under the rehabilitation, reintegration, therapy, and support. There are mechanisms where at present we work with those in the prison in our inmate family program. There's Christmas reunions through the Barbados Prison Service and a number of programs, back to school support for those through NGOs, not connected to any funds from the government at all, strictly from the NGOs and the church that provide supplies for those incarcerated, the children of incarcerated parents and so on. So there are a number of initiatives, and as the AG said, we'll be building it out more and more in looking at victim support.
Thank you very much. And my last question, I just want to express on behalf of the St. James South Neighborhood Network to the Police Commissioner the tremendous work that your top brass has been doing with our network in working with our families and our residents in relation to keeping the neighborhood as safe as possible. With the increased incidences that have taken place, naturally people feel even more alarmed. But I want to reiterate what the Honourable Member for St. Joseph said, that to solve this problem is going to require the entire country, that all of us have to play a part. Now, these communities have stepped up by having their neighborhood watches and so on, but I would want to ask you, what are some of the other things that you would like to see the general citizenship do as their part, as their role in helping us to handle and manage this issue of crime? Because I think it is time that Barbadians get beyond complaining about crime and go the next step and ask the question, how can we help? What can we do? And how can we be empowered to do this? So if you could just share with us what as citizens we need to do to help make this work, it would be appreciated.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'm going to ask the Commissioner of Police to address this.
Thanks. Your observation is appreciated, I must say. And for us, over time, we have worked with various communities, not only in St. James South, but throughout the country. And for us, where that is concerned, we are going to reinvigorate those neighborhood watches. One, that is something that has fallen by the wayside, and I believe that we need some new blood and injection where that is concerned. So we would target those districts. You mentioned a particular area, which was under some problems recently, that I guess that you're fully aware of. And that is something that we need to do. We need to go further in identifying those persons that would need whether it's medical intervention, psychological intervention, whatever it is, that create some level of harm to persons in various neighborhoods. So our officers, when they attend to these reports, they should capture all relevant information and identify persons who are in need of help and work with other government agencies to come in and lend that type of support for those persons to have them get the level of medical attention, whether it's psychological or whatever. It is those persons who we find that can create tremendous discomfort for general members of the public. So that is one area that we will work with. Now, in terms of how we go about having the youth groups reinvigorated again, because we need to redirect persons from being just there idle and getting involved in mischief. It is some programs which would bring that level of cohesiveness in communities, driving programs, putting those issues, those things in place, whereby they will be engaged in a profitable way, a wholesome way, and work with them. We need to also to bring the churches on board, because we cannot just look at it through the lens of the police service, but all those agencies that are out in the community, we must bond and gel together so that when we deliver the product is a well thought out product, and there must be, the end game must be to have persons change direction from bad to good and be honorable citizens throughout the community. So those are things that we can look to do. We also need to identify the schools that need the extra help. We cannot escape that there are some schools that would need the help from mine community officers and station managers, also to interact and engage, whether it's head teachers, whether it's ordinary teachers or whatever. Those persons who are in a situation whereby they are teachers, guidance counselors or whatever, all those persons we would need to bring on board and work with them. Because we cannot, as I mentioned already, we need all help, all hands on deck to get the situation really brought under control. So we will continue to try and deploy our resources in these problem areas whereby we can accomplish our objectives in terms of having each and every community safe and well sound in terms of living comfortably and walking about without being alarmed, harassed, or whatever going forward.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Just for clarification and that we understand, your second question, once you've asked your first question, the next question you ask must be supplementary to the first question. In other words, it should relate to the first question that you asked, not a new question, and that is what I want honourable members to follow. Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael East.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I start to feel a little alienated from the center of the debate, because I thought you felt that since I was on this side, it was part and parcel of the opposition. And I was wondering if that was influencing your thoughts.
No, not at all, Honourable Member.
I know there's some suspicion about that.
Not at all, Honourable Member.
Yeah. No. I think we have to reconnect with the seriousness of this debate. Concepts of crime goes as far back to the biblical times with Cain and Abel. And minor issues sometimes influence people to get engaged in serious felonious acts, such as murder, and probably treason too. We have so many thinkers over the years that try to address issues related to the values, the breaking down of values in society. Thomas Hobbes said, the life of man is nasty, solitary, and brutish and short. I think that is something that we must all reflect on. Everybody would like to live over 1,000 years if possible, but we know that Hobbes was right in that context. Nietzsche was even more dramatic, but extremely clear. When Nietzsche looked at the collapse of values in the society, which are schools and churches and institutions of such moral groundings exist, Nietzsche said, God is dead. He didn't mean literally God. Some people with simple minds would believe that he said literally God. He was saying that the attributes of decency and stability rest in the values of man. And God was at the center of giving the directions to those stabilities. We watch them collapse every day, one by one. The schools cannot hold anchor. The churches can't. The police force can't. I think that we all, as parliamentarians at the highest levels, we can't either. But collectively, if we recognize the principle of being our brother's keeper, we would be more deeply involved in the importance of this debate. I know we've had questions being asked by persons from different items and aspects of what constitutes the role of the Attorney General's office. But I think there are certain things that we are seeing occurring over and over again. Things like recidivism. Have we really made any serious study of what is responsible for a broad section of those who are incarcerated? After all the mechanisms we put within the prison system, all the melody and the things that we are seeing, are we seeing a reduction in recidivism? Well, that's a serious question for me.
That's your first question, Honourable Member?
Well, yes. But I was hoping to give you a collective that constitutes three questions. But if you want me to stop there, stop there. I'll come back with the second question shortly.
Yes, and come back later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. In relation to rehabilitation, we look at rehabilitation in the broad context. Rehabilitation programs are conducted by the Barbados Prison Service through the Ministry of Home Affairs, but you can say it's supplemented by the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Community Empowerment. They have a number of programs in the prison today, and is also supported by the National Crime Prevention Program. There has been studies on recidivism that were released, I think, as late as November 2024, which showed a slight reduction in recidivism. I don't know if a causation study was done to say that there's a link between the programs, but I can tell you that there's a slight decline. For more intense information on that, I will have to call on the Director of Criminal Justice and Research to speak more to that research that her office conducted, but I would need if the AG so permits. Yeah, I'm calling on the Director of Criminal Justice.
Good afternoon to the chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cheryl Willoughby. I'm the director at the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit. Regarding the study on recidivism, we did a study about 5 years ago that measured the rate of recidivism in Barbados, and it showed that we were having a problem whereby over 68% of persons who were released from prison over a 6-month period were reoffending. We recently did another one to determine whether or not some inroads were made regarding the efficacy of the rehabilitation programs at the prison. And as Minister Lane rightly said, we saw a slight reduction in the rate of recidivism at the prison. When we did a study 5 years ago, I requested from my staff that they also look at what were the barriers to reintegration. What were those things that were preventing inmates or ex-offenders from successfully reintegrating? And when we did that study, we found that persons who had substance abuse problems, mental health issues, as well as barriers to employment opportunities upon release. We spoke to a number of employers who were very, very keen on responding to our questions, and some of the answers that were given was that they were not comfortable employing persons who had convictions, who had criminal records. Also, what we found was that those persons who were released from prison, who were having serious mental health issues, there were no follow-up to some of the problems, the social problems that they were having. Also, these persons were going back into communities from which they came from, and there were no systems in place at the community level to address the socioeconomic problems that existed that would have perpetrated them offending in the first place. So what we have determined is that we need to also follow up as far as through care system, making sure that when persons are incarcerated and we recognize at the level of the prison that they have mental health issues and other social problems, that there's follow-up care afterwards. I know after a person is released, they have constitutionally done their time in prison, but there must be a system in place where persons can receive help, especially if we are to put a dent in the problem of crime and reoffending. What I must say is that we have, when we talk about recidivism, we also have to look at some of the offenses that persons are reoffending or recommitting after they've been released. And we found that persons who have been convicted in the first place for drug problems, they're the ones who are at the primary list of those persons who are reoffending, as well as persons who were convicted in the first place for property offenses or acquisitive crimes. So these are areas that need immediate intervention. What I will say is that within the Office of the Attorney General, in my department, we also have the mandate of planning, and we have embarked on a system where we meet with all of our partners to look at our findings, and these partners span the entire social services of Barbados, including our criminal justice partners, and we seek wherever possible to look at possible solutions to the problem.
Thank you.
65% are returning to prison. There's some call close to that. That's not a question, sir. Or rather a rhetorical question. I personally don't consider that to be good enough. It says that there's something that we must do that we're not doing. I would expect that within the prison system, there would be mechanisms that will help to repair the psychological damage that was done, since I do not believe that any human being on the face of the earth is born a criminal. There is something that is happening that we are producing so much criminal elements. Do we have the social psychologists or the criminologists in the appropriate numbers and quality that are engaged in a program within the prison system that will help us to be able to restore the inmates to some level of sanity and not necessarily seeing them as criminals, because this is irrational behavior that we're addressing. I don't like the idea of starting off with anybody is a criminal. It doesn't sound right to me. It's something the master has made a mistake. So I would like to know if you have the required mechanisms and the professional staff to address these issues, and if you could give me a quantitative assessment of the numbers and also a qualitative assessment of those people who are responsible for executing their responsibilities within the prison.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to engage in the dialogue, but in as much as the nub of the honourable member's presentation is to do with recidivism, and while I fully agree that the criminal justice system is an integrated system, so we can't chop off pieces and so on. Matters relating to what happens to an individual post-conviction do not fall within the portfolio of the Office of the Attorney General. Matters of reform of a person who is incarcerated used to be, but since the bifurcation of this ministry and that of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, those questions may more properly be directed to a different minister. But I am happy to have the discussion because some of the work that is being done in the National Peace Program is directed towards individual and to try to prevent recidivism. But in terms of what happens to them while they're in prison, that is really there's a different minister's portfolio. So I don't want to be unfair to the director of the Criminal Justice Research Project. But I'm happy that we can continue the discussion, but only insofar as it is addressing the issues that fall under our remit.
Honourable, I do mean that you mean the Ministry of Home Affairs, not Foreign Affairs. Home Affairs.
Minister Abrams is
Right, Minister
the
of Home
minister responsible
Home
for
Affairs.
Home Affairs.
Yes, we just have to have the record straight. Thank you. So that's the Ministry of Home Affairs, and not that you were referring to, and not Foreign Affairs.
It says that there's a vacuum, a void in administration. There will have to be some integrated link between the individual ministries, some kind of committee that allows persons who sit on the unit within the Ministry of Home Affairs to have that link in a committee that is part of the Attorney General's office. And it's an element that needs to be examined carefully, and I would like to urge the AG to explore it and try to impress upon those who shape governance the importance of having this unit, that these two entities could come together and address an issue like that. Or not, we can almost break down every ministerial department into 6 and 7 different ministries and escape our responsibility in addressing this issue of crime and incarceration. Now, I'm going to go to post-incarceration.
If you don't mind, let me just say, I agree with you, and it is for that reason that we have established since 2023 a Criminal Justice Reform Committee, which is chaired by the Chief Justice. The purpose of the Criminal Justice Reform Committee is to look at, as I said, they're integrated. So that committee looks at every single element that touches and concerns an individual as long as they're in the criminal justice system. And the members of that committee include the Minister of Home Affairs and also the Superintendent of Prisons. It involves the Probation Department. So we have a body that is established to ensure that instead of dealing with these discrete areas as unconnected concerns, that we look at them holistically. So that body does exist, so that the superintendent, the Bar Association is a member of that body. So there is a connection, because we recognize that when people go through the system and come back out, we run the risk that they fall back into the system again. So I don't mean to suggest that it is not an important part of the dialogue that has to take place, only that the specifics that you were requiring of us were not really within our bosom. But the Criminal Justice Research Project does a lot of work in the prisons. In fact, probably about half of their research in recent times at what happens in the prisons, people, what are the schools that are represented in the prisons, the levels of recidivism and things of that sort. So the research element is still with us, but the actual prison reform, probation and those kinds of matters are unfortunate. Well, they happen to be under another place. This question is important, and we've already begun to do what you just suggested.
Yeah. I'm just sorry that there's only 3 questions, but Mr. Chair.
You can come again.
In the post-incarnation dialogue, I think that we also have a duty to look at reintegration. Especially, we all know that when the ex-con, which is a nice term if you want to make it sound colorful, but it's not the best. When the ex-con, he is not escaping, he has served his time in prison. I think we have a responsibility to create a civilized environment. Although I don't like talking about hot spots, some people seem to believe that sounds nice, and police outposts in the middle of the district, not understanding when these terms are used, you stigmatize the community. And if I want to write an application anywhere, I have to write that I live in Chancery Lane, or even Westers or Westmoreland, that I would not be able to put on the word Ivy or Licorice Village or anything like that, because we are already facing, and the Pine and Carrington Village and the places, they are places, and we already got to face the reality that some of these areas are seen as gaps and housing areas and so on, these are hot spots. And I believe that we are trying to build a new society, and we don't have to park terms used by other people when addressing issues related to our people. As soon as you use a word that stigmatizes the community, even the police force and the judiciary starts with a bias, and therefore justice is not obtained if you come from the Pine, if you come from Silver Hill. And I know people write applications and send the applications with their aunt's address from Chancery Lane. I believe that, sir, and I'm asking, at this juncture, are we looking at some kind of units that during the transitory period from prison back into the mainstream of society, that a man who is released from prison this evening, and even his mother and father is running from him, can't we set up a system where the person is allowed to stay, not without having the freedom of going when he wants to go, but being able to stay until he reintegrates himself back into the mainstream of the community and his family. It is even suitable in terms of people who don't have professional skills. And when they go to ask for a job and say, where were you working before and how long? They're gonna tell a lie. They can't even get a job cutting grass.
Honourable member, let us get the gist of the question. So
Well,
that
it's
they
simple.
can
I don't
answer.
know. I don't know why it became so complex for you, sir. But the question is clear. Do we have the mechanisms in place for the reintegration of the ex-colony in the mainstream of the society? Simple.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the simple answer to this question is no. The system does not have any arrangements for public support for incarcerated persons once they come out. There's no doubt that things of that nature would be desirable, but I remind you of the comment I made earlier that as far as the system that we inherited is concerned, you get locked up, you come out, that's a matter for you. You get locked up, justice has been delivered to the victim. Barbados has changed as a society though, and I believe that the time is right for us to have these discussions. But like most things, we have to determine how do we prioritize our public resources. Do we give, does the government, I'm not proposing an answer, but let's posit the question. An individual from the constituency of, let's say, the Pine, somebody from the Pine is desperate for a house for them and the children. On the other hand, John Brown, who's shot at people, committed firearm, come out of prison, is desperate for a house. How do we prioritize? Which one will get the one house that NHC has available? It is a discussion that we need to have. There are a number of NGOs that have been involved in trying to improve the lot of individuals when they come out of prison. The National Peace Program even funded a program that was intended to do that, but unfortunately that program had to be truncated because it didn't do what it had said it was going to do. So we had to cut that short. But that program in the project proposal said that they were going to focus on individuals who have come out of prison and who are looking to be reintegrated into society. There is room for NGO work, there's room for government work, but I remind the honourable member that government is about balancing competing interests, and those competing interests have to be balanced with a minimum of friction and with a minimum of waste, and there has to be community buy-in in as many respects as possible, because housing is scarce. Jobs are a priority. I have no difficulty, we talked about it this morning. Individuals who've come out of prison, they should find work too. But are we going to provide housing for them? That's a discussion of another kind.
I just want to thank the AG and you too, sir, for allowing me to put a few simple questions with the hope that it will help us to find a new way of doing things in order to address some of the problems. So I hope that there was some suggestions in the questions that I asked as well.
Thank you. Honourable member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and wish to commend the Attorney General and his team from the various departments on their service to country. First, wish to ask about the registration department and the efficiencies of the department and what processes are being used to try to improve its function and its timeliness and its customer service and ability to respond to the public's needs. We know that, for example, applications for probate or letters of administration of estates have been, over the years, taking too long a time. When I first started to practice, almost 40 years ago, I remember the first application I did for probate of a will took 4 months. It now takes much longer than that. I know that as recently as last month, a policy initiative has been made whereby those applications, new ones, are now made online. So, Attorney General, like either you or the Registrar of the Supreme Court, who is here to speak, let the public know what is being done to make the registration department more user-friendly and customer service-oriented, and also as to whether we are satisfied that the registration office has enough hands on that deck manpower. We know that during COVID, as in most government departments, we had to cut back during COVID and when we went through the BREC program. But as to whether, whatever studies we have done has shown that there are enough hands on deck, enough officers employed by the registration office to fulfill the growing demand by the public on its services.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The registration department has been a feature of our judicial system from time immemorial. Over the years, we have tweaked the registry. I believe that in your own professional life, you would remember the days when the registration department was the land registry and the company's registry as well, and dealt with everything. But in our time, we've seen the registry separated into separate elements. Land registry has gone off, the company's registry, the intellectual property offices. So the registry now, the registration department focuses on the administration of the courts, both the magistrates court and the high court, and the collection and management of vital statistics information, that is births, deaths, and so on, and also the probate department. In relation to the functioning of the registry, in as much as it serves the Supreme Court, a lot of that process is now automated because, as you know, for quite some time now, we have been filing documents, litigation documents online. Just today, I was looking at some documents that were served on me as Attorney General, and they were all filed online. We follow a model that is used by the Caribbean Court of Justice, and it is something that has worked very well and is efficient. In terms of the births, the vital statistics, births, deaths, and so on, it is planned that that responsibility will be taken away from the High Court Registry and be moved to the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, where it more properly belongs. I believe, and I'm not able to quote any historic research, but I believe that a lot of things devolved onto the registration office simply because it was a government agency that was seen as being in a central place, and therefore all births and deaths were sent to the registration department. But the fact is The registration department as a body then does nothing with the statistics, the information. They don't process it. There's nothing that they're required to do with it except churn out birth and death certificates when called upon to do so. It has long been considered by this administration that the best place for collecting information relating to births and deaths are the people who actually use it, the people who prepare the voters list, the people who have to work out whether or not a person should be getting an ID card at the age of 16. What happens now is that the information comes in and then we do something called a data dump. Now this data dump used to take place it used to happen often in the earlier stages, but then it began to slip. So you would get a data dump every month. You would get a data dump every 3 months. So the electoral and boundaries would not know that a man or woman has died until sometimes many months after they have in fact passed on. We now have a situation where I believe the data dumps are done on a weekly basis. So all the information is to be sent to electoral and boundaries so that they can keep their registers up to date. But the truth is, it is an anachronistic process and really needs to leave the registration department. That is being worked on, and hopefully very soon you will see that happening. You will see electoral and boundaries being responsible for the collection, collation, and management of our vital statistics. A gloss on that is that the registration of birth should not even be done by any registry, that act should be taken, should be managed at the place where it actually happens. So that where the person is born, the QH or something like that, should really be the entity, the body, the place responsible for certifying that a birth took place on any given time. The big challenge that we have in the registration department, though, has to do with the question of probate. There is absolutely no doubt that a large amount of national resources are tied up in a probate process. It's common sense, really. For as long as an individual is unable to administer an estate, you have assets that are locked away and cannot effectively be used for the generation of wealth, that can't be used to satisfy debts, that can't be used to allow people to get on with their lives. When we looked at the situation about 3 or so years ago, we found that the backlog was huge. The backlog was huge. My first initiative, in order to help to get rid of the backlog, Honourable Member, was to engage experienced attorneys who are experienced in probate matters, to review the probate files, and based on that review of the probate files, the files will go forward to the registry for sign-off. But it wasn't any probate file. Their job really was to help us to clear the backlog. So they went in. At one point in time, we had engaged as many as 5 senior attorneys, people with substantial experience in probate matters, and their job was to tackle the backlog, help us to get rid of the backlog. And therefore, by 2023, we found, when the project was successful, when we did the stats at the time, I was able to report to Cabinet, I believe even to this chamber, that we were behind by just 1 year, and that in almost all of the previous years, there was about 10% in each year of estates that had not been granted. And the reasons for that 10% being a residual quantum are myriad. Individuals have died. Sometimes lawyers have died. Individuals haven't paid fees, a whole set of things. So you had about 10% of probate matters that were just sitting there, and we are actually going to be communicating to all those applicants and lawyers and so on to say if we can try to to see what we can dispatch. Currently, the corpus at the back of the backlog now is in the year 2023, and I've had discussions with the Chief Justice, and we're looking to get that sorted out as well. I can say to you, though, that by engaging additional staff, and we have engaged 1 or 2 additional staff members, we've begun to see some change. The process is now an online process. There are a number of systems that have now been employed so as to make sure that we can bring this specter of long waits for grants of letters of administration or letters testamentary, bring it from being a common feature to be only an occasional bother. We're looking to get rid of that very shortly. And I think that we've already begun to see those results. I had a very surprising WhatsApp message from an individual, came out of the blue. That person said to me that they filed an estate in January, and by last week, this time in February, they were able to get letters testamentary.
Thank you, AG. Mr. Chairman, I should have mentioned, of course, the registration department is program 241, sub-program 247. My supplementary relates to the magistrates court, which is, over which the registration department has some responsibility, and that's program 242, sub-program 249. And of course, we know, Mr. Chairman, that the majority of judicial matters, in fact, the vast majority, believe maybe close to 90%, certainly over 80%, are heard in the magistrates' courts. And therefore, the question again arises as to the efficiency of the magistrates' courts in terms of administration of justice and implementation of the penalties, fines, which it imposes, and specifically as well, the maintenance, collection of child maintenance from, invariably fathers for support, financial support of their children. And, over the years, both administrations, Mr. Chairman, there have been issues with, we hear, and certainly I know as a fact, collection of maintenance monies imposed by the magistrates' court on fathers, collection by the mothers, and mothers, single mothers, already under tremendous financial pressure, not having the money which the court has placed on fathers in paternity matters or child maintenance matters. And Attorney General, Honourable Attorney General, I wish to give you or again the Registrar of the Supreme Court the opportunity to speak about what is being done to try to better manage this system so that the fines, penalties imposed by the magistrates' court on people can be collected, especially child maintenance cases. Is there technology that is being implemented to try to improve this system? Is it a case where we're training bailiffs better, court process officers better? I know of a matter years ago, Mr. Chairman, where a bailiff was to serve documents on a person who happened to be his neighbor and could not find the neighbor for months. Documents not served. So what is the government doing, your ministry, sir, to improve this system, make it more efficient?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Your question is timely. In relation to payments, particularly and you said particularly payments of maintenance to mothers, rarely fathers. The Magistrates Court is currently in the process of implementing a new case management and digital payment system to operate in all of its magistrates courts. There's currently a pilot project in place at the court at District D in Keene Garden. And at this point, what we're doing is inputting the data and testing the integrity of the system. What is happening now is focusing on the clerical and the front-end staff who are going to be the end users. What is key is that the method of disbursing the funding will not be what happens now, where a mother has to go to a court and collect cash, or where a father can only go and pay in cash and so on. We're going to be looking at a digital payment solution. And we've talked about this for a long time, but I'm very happy to say that we are at the point where we are in the pilot phase. We have 9 magistrates courts, Honourable Member, 9. And all of these magistrates courts, well, not all of them, as you would know, as complex will have a family court. The other magistrates. But all of the courts will be connected to this system, and we will be using a digital payment system very much like the Adopt a Family. Colleagues will remember that when we started the Adopt a Family program, the question was, how do we make the payments to these people? Simple solution was that every household would get a digital card. They would have a card, the money gets added to the card, and they're able to go and take off and spend it as they need to. So we're not reinventing the wheel in that regard. We will not be paying out cash. This will allow for better accounting. It will allow for more effective use of individuals' times. You know, when you show up at a court and you hear that the court clerk out to lunch can't get the child money, court clerk comes in late, can't get the child money. This will remove all of those issues. So money comes in, money gets credited to your card, you go and you do it. And I'm really very proud of the work that we've done in this regard. I think you also mentioned the conditions of the magistrates' courts. As I said, we have 9. We all know that we've had some challenges in years past in relation to the physical condition of those courts, and in fact, we've had to close some. I'm sure you remember the court at Belle Plaine, or you remember the court at District B. We've had to close a number of courts and try to rationalize that work, but I'm able to say that by doing the substantial renovation at the Ford Simmons complex, we've been able to allow our magistrates to use 3 fantastic courts down there, one of which is completely new. I think that's used by the chief magistrate, but we refurbished 2 of the older courts so that we now have comfortable accommodation and accommodation that is free of environmental concerns. Honourable Member, we've had to close the Simultaneous Court. You know that the Simultaneous Court had the criminal, it had the civil, it had domestic. Simultaneous Court was an important center of activity for us, but unfortunately its condition, in fact, let's rewind a bit. The Simultaneous Court used to be a primary school. So it isn't to say that we took a new building, that we took a place and built a new building. We took an old building and tried to turn it into a modern magistrates court complex. That has always presented difficulties. And therefore, we are now in a position where we've had to close that court, we've had to close that complex, and provided in the estimates for this year will be some work to start a completely new project at Simultaneous Courts. That is going to run over a 2-year period, financial year 2025-26 and 26-27. And the projected cost of that upgrade is the sum of $5,398,000. And so we're looking to do that work there. The magistrates courts are going to benefit from a significant computerization program, which is intended to start in the coming financial year as well. We're getting some support from donors from overseas, but I think most of the funding is going to be from us, and therefore we will see the magistracy and the magistrates court system benefiting from significant computerization in much the same way that the Supreme Court is computerized. Honourable Member, there are going to be some decisions that we have to make, though, about the magistrates courts. The magistrates courts do not function all day, and that is a problem. That is a problem. It is a problem, in fact, when any of our courts do not function all day. Our police stations function all day, our schools function all day, all of the government departments will function all day. But unfortunately, we have some magistrates courts that start late and end early. And that is not an efficient use of our facilities or our manpower. And I've had discussions with the Chief Justice and asked him to let us sit down and see how we can address those issues. I don't know if I've covered everything that you've raised, but if there's anything else, I'm happy to come back.
Thank you, Attorney General. Mr. Chairman, just checking, I have one more question or two. I'm allowed. Haven't asked two.
Is it a related question to your first question?
No, it isn't. So,
No, the standing orders say it must be related. There's
Well-
three supplementary questions.
okay, well,
related to your first question.
I'll relate it then, sir. I'll relate it. Honorable Attorney General, of course, tied in with all of this is the issue of police and law enforcement. And
Honorable member, you can come back tomorrow. We have
okay,
gone past our time.
okay, no problem, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 67-3, which specifically the provision which speaks to us being able to not have more than 6 hours being allocated to the debate on a particular head. 67-3.
Huh? Honourable, you need to revert to government business first.
Go ahead.
Continue. Honourable Leader Government Business.
Right, so Mr. Speaker, we have at this point completed the first head. As you know, the standing orders provide for 6 hours to be allocated per head. We are mindful that this is obviously a very important and substantial debate as it relates to crime. And we therefore wish to beg to move that the section 67.3 of the standing orders, specifically the section which relates to us only doing 6 hours, be suspended to allow for additional time for the debate to continue.
Wait a second.
The question is that Standing Order 67.3 be suspended. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Standing Order 67.3 is suspended. Honourable Leader Government Business.
And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would beg to move the suspension of the House until tomorrow, the 18th of February at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 10 a.m. tomorrow. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Could I kindly remind all members, could I kindly remind all members that this chamber commences at 10 a.m. I do believe that the standing orders speak to that. But this chamber don't start at 10:30 or 11 o'clock. I would think, therefore, it's incumbent upon all members, honorable members, please get here at the appointed time. It is easy for me to come to this chamber if persons don't want to attend on time and sit at the 10 a.m. as is the want. And if members are not here, I am vested with the authority to adjourn this chamber. A word to the wise is enough. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 10 a.m. tomorrow.